Welcome to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, hosted by attorneys Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen.
Good morning, and welcome back to another episode of Life, Death, and the Law. I'm attorney Adam Hansen, and I'm in the studio today with the one and only Mr. Shawn Garner. He's my partner in crime here at the law firm, and then we've got Lana.
Good morning.
Lana works with us in the law firm as well. What's unique about Lana is that she is our resident Russian-born Russian citizen, and then she immigrated to the United States. But she's got an interesting story, and we love having her perspective on things. The topic of today is we're going to talk about really communism in general, and that was because of Shawn bringing this up. The Marxism, communism, socialism, all these isms we're going to talk about today. And the question becomes, is it better for us to cede some of our freedoms to our sovereign government in exchange for ease of, I would say, or argue, life amenities such as healthcare? Before we came on the air, we were in a heated debate. I wouldn't say heated. We weren't yelling at each other, but everybody had an opinion as to whether or not healthcare should be part of our benefit package as being a citizen of the United States or not. Do I need to go out and work in order to find my own insurance carrier, and hopefully I can afford to pay those premiums, or should I just rely on the government to provide that for me?
Or pay privately altogether.
Yeah, and so all these issues are encompassed by whether or not we are ceding some of our freedoms to our government sovereign, whether you're in the United States, you're in Venezuela, you're in Russia, you're in Western Europe countries such as Spain, Portugal, or the United Kingdom. So every government has a little bit of a different take on these things, and we are used to in the United States our constitutional rights, and that's very ingrained in us because of our Constitution, which is unique in the whole wide world. Other governments have tried to emulate that Constitution, have not been successful as much or to the level of the United States of America. You can argue all day long that there are issues in our history that I would argue we overcame, and we continue to overcome those, and all of that is because of our unique Constitution, which I believe to be God-given. But I don't know what your opinion is, and you can have your own opinion, but that's my opinion, is that it wasn't a happenstance. I just got back from Mount Vernon. My wife and I and my two daughters went back to Mount Vernon just a couple weeks ago, and it was just neat to see George Washington's property there and the way that he contemplated his service to our country, and how he didn't want to be involved, and how others around him pushed him into this kind of thing of being a president of the United States. And then even after his second term, which he didn't want to do in the first place, everybody was clamoring for him to be the United States king. And he walked away. Like we talked about in the last program, he walked into that constitutional hall, a president of the United States, and walked out a farmer in Virginia. So Lana, we're going to go to you because you have unique perspectives on this, and Shawn's going to probably pipe in here because you're the one that brought this topic up when we were talking about it earlier before the show, was this idea of communism. And I maybe it's better if we start with kind of a definition, Shawn. How would you define communism?
Okay, so this is how I would define it. I would define communism that the state owns all the property. There is no property owned by the individual, so no means of production owned by individual, and to each given to the state according to his ability, and to each given back to them according to their need. And that's the basic premise of communism. And on its surface, a very shallow surface, but on its surface, it sounds like a very moral way to run a society, because we're treating everybody equally, we're sharing, and we're living in what should be a utopian society. Capitalism, on the other hand, is to each according to his ability, and he can climb the ladder of success as high as he possibly can, or without any impediment from the government. And if he decides not to climb the ladder, then he may starve to death. So those are really the major differences between the two. And when you look at the morality just based on theory of the two, communism, socialism, seems like the more moral approach. But we all know that outcome is more important than intent. We can intend to do good but cause harm, and the outcome is going to trump the intent every time. And we've been able to experience the intent of the implication of communism and socialism time and time again. And what we've found is there's been mass suffering and destruction that have been endured by the populations for which that government regime was imposed. For example, and this is the reason why this came up in the first place, because right now, if you ask anybody in high school, college, even elementary, what a preferred pronoun was, they would be able to explain it to you, and in the context that you need to be aware of it. And a year ago, 2 years ago, if somebody asked me what a preferred pronoun was, I'd ask them to repeat the question.
We're talking about English work, right? We're English class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about classes here in America. So everybody knows what preferred pronouns are, and I think that they are silly, quite honestly. And that's my opinion, and you can hate me and cancel me if you want. But I think they're quite silly. If you want to dress up as a woman and you go out and you present yourself as a woman and people call you a she, so be it. I have no problem with that. If someone presented themselves to me as a she, I would call them a she. But if they present themselves and it looks like somebody who is a male or non-binary, and I get confused, and they help clarify that to me, then fine. I'll use their pronoun if it fits in with my concept of reality. What I have a hard time with is when I perceive reality, and I understand reality not to be relative, that it's to be absolute, that I can perceive it around me and then I can act within that. But they say, no, I look like a man, I have the anatomy of a man, I have an XY chromosome, but you're going to call me a she. I'm like, whoa. Then what happens is my brain short circuits a little bit and it feels wrong to me. And so that everybody knows. And there's a lot of people out there that think that I'm a bigot and that I should be canceled and that I should be put in a straitjacket and thrown away in a dark pit somewhere. And that's what I want to bring up here, because 36% of those same people that are so educated about preferred pronouns and how we should act about them, not just to be tolerant about them, but that they should be embraced and celebrated, that those same people also have, many of them, a favorable view on communism. And I want to talk a little bit about the facts of communism, and that's why we have a special guest here, Lana.
I was going to bring up a point here. So as you were speaking about that, my question for Lana is, when you have your discussions with your parents that are still living in Russia, I asked you, man, all right, I made the comment, we should have your mom and dad on the show. You know, we should call them. I don't know what time it is there, but we should have them on the show. And you said, well, they only speak Russian, so that wouldn't really work. You'd have to translate for us. But having said that, as Shawn was talking, my first thought was, how many conversations do you have with your parents who live in Russia about gender affirmation and proper pronoun use?
To be honest, I've never spoken with my parents about on this topic at all. I don't think that's even a thing recognized in Russia.
Exactly.
Russia has just barely started accepting homosexualism, so they're very, very far from accepting.
What about China? Do you think they're probably on par with what Russia is in the sense of gender affirmation and these pronoun
I think they're even
choices?
stricter than Russia. There are some freedoms in Russia. There's some freedom, room to operate. I don't think that is the case in China at all.
Yeah, and North Korea.
And North Korea.
And many, or if not all, of the communist regimes. And that's because one of the tenets of communism and Marxism in general is that you have to abandon the individual. You have to abandon religion. You have to abandon all of the separate distinctions that make you individual and embrace the community. And so religion is a big thing. For me, my purpose in life is to return and live with God. So I act in accordance with what I think God's will, at least I attempt to act what I think God's will is. And the greatest example to me was Christ, who gave over all of his agency to God, his Father. He says, I'm going to do my Father's will. And that is my purpose here in life, to follow what God has intended for me to do, because I believe that he is a loving, caring God, and he wants the best for me. So if you strip that away from me, you strip my identity and my purpose of life. My purpose of life is not just to subsist. It's not just to eat so I can work, so I can earn food, give it back to the community so we can all eat again and then work some more. That to me is being a zombie. And the statistics, when I first heard that statistically 36% of millennials have a favorable view of communism, it blew my mind. This is where our education system becomes dangerous. Not just like, it's not accomplishing the full extent of the benefits that we could be providing. It's super dangerous. For example, to have a favorable view on a communist regime is to ignore the facts. Let's just talk about facts here for a second. Vietnam. We all know that there's the war in the Vietnam in the 60s, and 50,000 American soldiers died there. But 1 million Vietnamese were killed there by the communist regime for not adopting and accepting the communist way of life. In Eastern Europe, there was another 1 million people that were killed. Now, these are citizens. These are not combatants. These are not soldiers. These are citizens. And for every 1 million that are killed, there's another 10 million that suffer, because the 1 million that are killed are the ones that are standing up. Generally, the providers of the families are standing up against the regime. And so they're being killed, and their families are suffering and starving to death. In Ethiopia, there was 1.5 million. In North Korea, 2 million. Now, according to these numbers, these are all very, very conservative numbers coming out of research done by Yale University. Cambodia, 2 million. Soviet Union, between 20 and 40 million. The fact that we have a fudge factor of 20 million lives shows how evil that governmental regime is. China, between 60 and 80 million people. And why? Why did they have to starve to death? And mostly a lot of it was starvation. Some of it was direct political persecution and torture. But a lot of these people starved because China was providing the Soviet Union with food in exchange for weapons, because it wanted to become a military power. And with a communist regime, you've got all the power concentrated at the top, so the people really have no voice, even though they call it the People's Party. And that, to me, is very distressing, that 36% of the millennials think that regimes that had that type of outcome with their government implementation is good. Now, we have a moral obligation to learn about the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were slaughtered. We have a moral obligation to learn about the history of our nation and the sin of slavery in order to avoid that and to appreciate how good freedom is. And to ignore those things, I think every American would acknowledge, would be to be immoral if those things were not taught in school. This is just as immoral, if not more so, because more people have died, more people have been persecuted under this, and it's been a worldview that has not just existed as an alternative government, but it's been a government that has attempted to supersede and expand its boundaries over all the world. And we are now, in the United States, looking at it in a favorable light. So we got to take a break. We'll come back. This is Life, Death, and the Law.
Coming up, more thought-provoking conversations on life, death, and the law right after this.
Hey, Yuma, Dave Ramsey here. If you listen to our show or know anything about us, then you know I only recommend products and services I trust and I believe in. That's why when it comes to protecting your assets and planning for your loved one's future, you've got to call my friends Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen at the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen. I encourage you to take the first step and attend a free, no-pressure seminar and learn all of your options. The firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen has been educating the Yuma community for over 40 years, and this is the only area of law that they practice. Shawn and Adam believe in giving free education to help people make smart decisions about their assets and help them leave a legacy for their family that they can be proud of. Schedule a free personal consultation today. Call 783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.
You're listening to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, the law firm that has been voted Yuma's best 6 years in a row.
Welcome back to Life, Death, and the Law. We're talking about the importance of education in general and the difference between what an idea is as far as being good or bad and moral and immoral, and the actuality of the practice of an idea and what is more important. And most of us would believe that the actual outcome is more important. If somebody came to me and said, hey, can you provide ABC for me, legal planning or whatever? And I said, yes. And I had the idea of doing it, but in the end, I decided to go to the beach and take their money and spend it on a vacation. Well, then that idea didn't get them anything and made me a thief. So what we have to look at is what actually comes out of these ideas. Communism is the idea that everybody shares and shares alike. Everybody contributes to society according to their ability. But the reality of it is that the greatest evil of human history has been perpetuated by communism. So, Adam, you had some statistics that you saw on your own about how many people died from the Nazi movement and German aggressions during World War II. So what were some of those numbers that you came up with?
Well, so when I did the research, it was a European study that I saw, and it wasn't a definitive number. Obviously, we can't count every life that was lost during World War II, specifically from Nazism. But in our common dialogue, even today, when somebody is doing something to the extent that it's reprehensible, you'll often hear, well, you're being a Nazi, or we hear that term thrown around a lot because it has an attribution to a horrible and horrific event in our world history.
And they have no protection. If you're called a Nazi, nobody says, "Oh, you're offending the Nazis." It's okay.
Yeah,
the Nazis, they're at the bottom of the barrel as far as political classes go.
So that ideology was responsible for the eradication of millions of lives, and on a scale to compare it to communism, that was my curiosity. How does the Holocaust and that ideology compare to actual communism as a broader ideology? And communism has accounted for more than a billion lives being lost, and it accounts for even more daily because it's an ideology that continues to exist in countries such as China, Russia, Venezuela, and so these ideas continue to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of people daily, And so how does that compare to what happened during the Holocaust? When I did my research, the numbers that I found were something like, when you do the math, basically what the study was how many in the Jewish population existed theoretically before World War II, and then how many after, and not just them, but gypsies like in northern Spain and southern France. So there were other groups that were targeted by the Nazi ideology, and so they started with this number, and then they ended with this number, and so that ended up being about 4 to 6 million, something like that. And so I just did the math. Well, how many lives is that in comparison to communism? And it's 200. Communism accounts for 250 times the amount of lives lost than the Holocaust, or that period of our history, our world history, which is, if we had a 250% increase in our revenues here in the firm, man, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a beach in Panama. but that is exponential. And why aren't we talking about that in our educational system? And Lana, you had mentioned before, I asked you, well, coming into this, are you versed in communism, like principles of Marxism? You said, yeah, we had to study that. That was part of what we studied in school growing up. And your traditional school route, tell us about that. I mean, it's kind of similar to what we do here in the United States. You have high school, you have college, you have
middle school, high school. These are all parts of the secondary education, and then we go on to the higher education.
And when you
That's
went through
college,
school,
university.
you lived in the Soviet Union.
Correct, yes.
So
I started.
So that it's so great to have firsthand knowledge of somebody that actually lived through that process and the transformation of the country. Now, I don't think that anybody would say that Russia has fully revolutionized out of communism. They're still very much a left-leaning government. But under the Soviet Union, tell us how life was compared to how it is now, and your ability, even under somewhat oppressive taxes in the United States, the quality of life that you experience.
Well, I was going to school. I started elementary school when the communism kind of was nearing its last legs in the beginning, in early 80s. And we all know it fell in the early 90s. But I still had a good 10 years to experience that. Well, we had the communism. Actually, Russia, as my mom, who is a retired history teacher, corrected me. Russia was not a communist country. It was a socialist country. Apparently, there's a big difference. And then she said that she didn't want to speak on this topic anymore because she's a patriot.
Yeah.
That's today when I asked her if she wanted to be interviewed. So you can see that the older generation is still very much brainwashed, and they were born and raised. They breathed socialism. Mind you,
because
my mom
the first and foremost loyalty is to the party.
Absolutely. And my mom was never even a member of the party. She refused to join the party when she was young. When it was time for her to join the party, as like 19, 20 years old. So you can call her a dissident, and still she's very much patriotic and supportive of the government. Well, anyway, I just remember that there was always deficit of something. We never had candy or chocolate or any luxurious or expensive foods to eat. Everything we ate when I was growing up was grown in my grandmother's garden or orchard. The fruits that were grown where I lived in central Russia, that's all we had. There was constantly a lack of clothing. My dad had to pay someone under the table to get clothing, to just obtain regular clothing for me and my sister. And it was such a holiday. It was such a celebration whenever he brought back a pile of dresses for me to try on. And even if they didn't fit, I still wore them because, it happens once a year or twice a year. So it was, as I said previously, I did not have a bad, miserable childhood. I was happy because that's all I knew. My parents loved me. My family loved me. All my friends were poor, just like me. So we didn't have anything to compare against each other. There was free education. I did not have to pay for my higher education even after I graduated school and went on to study at the university. There was free medicine for all. There was just, there was no competition. There was just one store that sold goods, like household goods. There was one store that sold grocery provisions, and that is it. You could never choose from anything but one thing. Mind you, I come from a very small rural area where I was growing up. It was only up to 10,000 people who lived there. I admit that, for instance, in Moscow, the situation was was better. There were more goods and services provided to people who live in Moscow. It was always the capital. I think the larger cities did have the luxury of having more stuff provided to them as us in the rural areas.
So you mentioned that your mom says that they're not communists, they're socialists. And we've talked about that, you and I, before. And I am not as versed, obviously, as you are. You know it better than anybody about the history of Russia and the changes that have happened. But even when we have those discussions, I ask you and I press you because I just want to understand the dynamics there of the population and their mindset, the ideology. And you said, yeah, when that stuff happened in the 90s, we did turn into, let's say, a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to also say air quotes, a democracy, because
Right.
even on it might be projected as a democracy, but would you still call it that? Do people really have a voice there when it comes to voting and putting in elected officials, or is it just a front?
Right in the 90s, right after the Soviet Union collapsed, the people did have the power of voice, and there were different referendums, those global meetings called from all cities and towns and villages of Russia, where they did choose to elect or to proceed that way, or to choose this general secretary over that general secretary. However, the more time passed since the 90s, I feel the more of the older elements of the socialism started creeping up. And especially with Putin coming to power in so many terms repeatedly, he started abridging everyone's freedoms and taking away the actual voice of the people. Sure, on paper, it still sounds very nice. People in Russia still have a vote, a right to vote, a right to elect to do something. However, I don't think that's actually happening in real life.
Yeah, it's a facade. I mean,
Absolutely a
how
facade.
many people in the last election voted for Vladimir Putin? What percentage?
Well, I'm sure it was, according to the statistics that people are aware of, it's 80%. But
I'm surprised it's that low. I thought it was in the 90s.
well, they had to leave. Oh, maybe probably it's high 80s. They had to leave some,
And I've
Decency.
never seen anything like that in a democracy where individuals have freedom of thought and speech, and there are diverse ideas for running the government. So it's the idea of communism is that the people get to choose. The reality of communism is that there's a very small percentage of the elite at the top, and they never miss a meal. They go out to luxury restaurants, they go out on European vacations, and the rest of the people, they get what's left over. And even with a free education and free health care, you got to say, okay, well, even if you have all the education in the world, what good does it do you if you can't buy a house?
you can apply it.
If you can't buy a car? Were you able to buy a car when you lived, because you grew up as a teenager and then a high schooler and then a college student. Did you ever own a car in Russia?
Oh, no, that was unheard of. We had to save for several years. Now it's much easier. Now that part of the economy is actually, it runs by credit. You can take a loan and you can buy a car, but not when I was growing up.
So much easier. Let's compare that to much easier. You now own how many vehicles?
Well, my husband and I own 3 vehicles.
Okay. And compare the vehicles that you own to the vehicles that you could easily purchase in Russia right now. Is there any comparison? The value of the vehicles, the quality of the vehicles, the ease in obtaining them?
No, the vehicles that you are able to obtain, just an average Russian citizen, would be either vehicles produced in Russia, which are not of very good quality. They do not have the duration of the 2010 Toyota.
I don't see any Russian vehicles over here. Why is that?
Because they do not compete with American vehicles, with Japanese vehicles, even with the whatever produced in Europe, like Peugeot or Renault, anything produced, especially the German vehicles. The German vehicles are considered luxury. Mercedes, Audi, they cost a lot of money. Not too many people in Russia, even now, even with loans, can afford them. So we have a Mercedes van. My parents would never be able to afford it.
Okay. So the quality in life that you have under this flawed system, supposedly, of capitalism, although it seems more selfish on its surface, it's actually produced more wealth and allowed common people to own property
Thrive, yeah.
and to thrive and to
Benefit
benefit
from
and
it.
enjoy life. Whereas the more moral concept of sharing everything has reduced that ability to do so. Another
Absolutely.
concept to me and purpose of my life, and this is, I would think, for life in general, whether you be a human being or an animal or a tree, is to perpetuate your species, right? We want to reproduce. We want our children to live, first of all, and then have successful, happy lives. And in communist regimes, they curtail that. They limit the ability. For many years in China, there was the one-child policy.
I think it's still ongoing in China.
I don't know. I thought that they lifted it, but we'll have to go to a break and we'll come back. This is Life, Death, and the Law.
Coming up, more thought-provoking conversations on life, death, and the law right after this.
Hey, Yuma, Dave Ramsey here. If you listen to our show or know anything about us, then you know I only recommend products and services I trust and I believe in. That's why when it comes to protecting your assets and planning for your loved one's future, you've got to call my friends Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen at the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen. I encourage you to take the first step and attend a free, no-pressure seminar and learn all of your options. The firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen has been educating the Yuma community for over 40 years, and this is the only area of law that they practice. Shawn and Adam believe in giving free education to help people make smart decisions about their assets and help them leave a legacy for their family that they can be proud of. Schedule a free personal consultation today. Call 783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.
You're listening to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, the law firm that has been voted Yuma's best 6 years in a row.
Welcome back to Life, Death, and Law. I'm attorney Adam Hansen. I've got my partner, Shawn Garner, and we've got Lana, our resident Russian in the firm, and she teaches us every day of some really cool things. And she's a great individual to get to know. And what I love about you, Lana, is that you're adventurous. You go out on all sorts of different adventures almost every weekend, I would argue, right?
Yes, we try.
You guys, when I say you guys, you and your husband, you like to go out and hike, but not just hike. I mean, you do all sorts of fun, adventurous hikes and all over the place. Utah, California,
Hawaii.
Yeah, that's really cool. In fact, when I came to work, was it last week when I was like, what happened to your car? Because there's a big dent in the side. And you're like, oh, off-roading. So that's pretty awesome. But she's a great individual, and we love having her with us here at the firm. She gives us a great perspective and dynamic to our team. But we've been talking a lot today about the ideologies of capitalism versus communism. We threw out some stats before, and Shawn asked you the question, when Vladimir Putin was last elected, by how much of a margin was he elected? And you said probably about 80%. And Cody, you fact-checked this. You said it was about 77% is what the number was. So we just want to get that out there. But basically 80%, like you said. So going to Shawn's point, I mean, is that really a democracy or is something fishy happening? I mean, I don't know the last time that we elected a president in the United States under a theoretical democracy rule, democratic republic ideology at 80%. I don't think that's ever happened.
What did Reagan get?
Reagan popped into my mind,
Yeah,
but
right.
I don't think he got that.
It was 80%.
Well, no, but I just remember that map that was being so red. But
Yeah.
obviously you had California and New York on that.
Yeah, probably popular vote. He was probably high 50s.
Yeah, probably something like that. And I mean, you were always going to be around that 50 to 60%, I would guess, just because that's just
Even the most popular. Most presidents win only by a couple percentage points. Even very popular presidents like Barack Obama.
or President Biden. He had the most votes out of any American president in United States history. So
Yeah, the most in number, but not the greatest margin.
yeah, but still, I mean, he blew us out of the water, right?
Yeah.
We're all for Biden, aren't we?
In comparison, that 84
We're
Reagan
excited.
was 58%, and the
Yeah.
country was practically red.
Yeah,
Wow.
58%,
Wow.
one of the most popular
On our
presidents in recent history.
Best years, yeah.
I love the conversations you had with Shawn about cars and how, really, because you said, what blew me away is that you said something that was really an interesting idea to understand, because you said back in Russia, yes, now it's easier to get a car, but it's still kind of difficult. You have to go out on credit most of the time and to get that car. I would argue that's the same here in the United States. Most of us will probably go take a loan to get a car. Most of us do that because it's easy to do it, number one. Number two, we might have a financial reason for doing that, and such that maybe they're giving us this loan for 0 interest for 3 years or whatever. Shawn, I was talking to your brother the other day, and he bought something like this recently last year for tax purposes. He needed to reduce some stuff on his taxes, so he went out and bought something. His accountant told him to buy it, and he's like, I could have paid cash for this, but why? When they're giving me free money, it was 0% interest for like 5 years. And he's like, okay. So he took the loan. It makes it easier for the transaction. They're happy. He's happy. So it's probably, in comparison to Russian loans, a lot easier here in the United States, I argue.
Lower interest too.
But what made me really interested was that you said, well, here in the United States, I have 3 cars. Not only is it easier to get a car, but I've got 3 of them because of the need. Like you said, you go out on these adventures, and so you need different cars for different adventures. You've got that big Mercedes van, the Sprinter, that can do a lot of the things that you need it to do because you got on these adventures, those camping things. But what was interesting to me was I thought to myself, here in the United States, what's the difference where you have a capitalist system that seems, like Shawn was saying, on its face to be very selfish? The idea that I'm in it for me, I'm going to do everything I can to get as much as I can. That, to me, is not capitalism at all. I mean, the idea that I'm going to go out and I'm going to hopefully perform and I'm going to compete better than my competitor, that way I get more, drives me to innovate. It drives me to bring things to the market that you're going to want, because if you don't want it, then I'm not going to thrive. So I'm going to change my business model. It causes me to grow, and it causes me to do better. The more I grow, the more I earn, the more prosperous I am, the more I am willing to actually give. So if I were to go to Russia and I would start begging on the street, how much am I going to actually acquire begging on the street in Russia in comparison to downtown Manhattan, where you have a lot of wealth? And even here in Yuma, I would argue that those that are on the streets that are panhandling, they're probably bringing in quite an income in comparison to those panhandlers in downtown Moscow.
Well, are there a lot of panhandlers in Russia?
Not during Soviet Union. That was obviously a big no-no. But now, the most panhandlers actually sit by the churches, by the entrance of the churches. So whenever parishioners go in, they donate money because they feel bad and they're in the giving spirit already. So, but in Moscow, I have never seen a beggar or a panhandler.
That's because in Washington,
that's actually capitalism.
Because in Washington, you just recently visited Washington.
Yeah.
What did you experience there, Adam?
Oh, Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, so it's very similar to nothing compares to San Francisco, but there are panhandlers everywhere. I mean, there's rampant drug users. It's just nasty. It's nasty. You don't want to be there.
Uh-huh.
And
how does that compare to Moscow?
Well, I have not seen many panhandlers recently in Moscow. I went in January. It was cold, mind you. It was very, very cold. So they tend to stay. Oh, subways, actually. Now it brings me back. The subway, because they're underground tunnels, panhandlers do tend to go there. Do
they focus on tourists or Russian nationalists? Or is there any focus at all with the panhandlers? Because it seems to be that, they have a strategy when they're going about their business. Many documentaries have been done on panhandling. You can make up to $50,000 to $75,000 a year just begging. Oh, wow. And so, what do you see in comparison to the big cities that you visited around the U.S. and in Russia with the people going and begging?
I think they do. There's I don't know. People think that people who live in Moscow, they are colder at heart. So people who donate are actually people coming from the rural areas who then become, start living permanently in Moscow. So they target, I want to argue, they target those people who they recognize are not born and raised Moscovians. And also they do tend to target the sites that tourists frequent.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So it's not in the communist mentality to give to a beggar for most I would say, Russian-born individuals. Would that be a fair statement?
I don't think the concept of begging even existed in the communist society. They were outlawed, just like gypsies. They were just like any nomadic tribes or anyone who did not have a steady income or a steady place to live. There were no homeless people, mind you. It was illegal. They would be rounded up and they would be given a place to live, and they would be given forcibly a job to hold. It was not allowed not to work, not to live at one place.
Now, and we make a big deal out of slavery, as well we should, in the United States. It is a very horrible, peculiar institution. And what you just mentioned there sounds a lot like slavery when they're compelled to work, because they're not allowed to be homeless. So they're given and assigned a labor force, and then they're compelled to work in that labor force.
Oh yes, and not only that. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. If you don't work, if you do not have a steady place to live, those individuals were considered mentally unstable and mentally sick. Mm-hmm. They were committed to asylums. Actually, they had to go to to a mental asylum, and they had to stay there till they recovered, and then they were released into the general population.
When we were on break here, you talked a little bit about what happened in Russia during World War II, how many combatants were killed compared to how many people were killed as a result of the Communist Revolution. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, and that was already, these are the figures that I studied at school. So these were the figures recognized by the Russian government. It was in high school after Soviet Union fell already. So we were taught that during the World War II, the victims of the German Nazis, 22 million Soviet citizens died, murdered, or killed in action in World War II. By comparison, Stalin and his repressions from the 1930s till the mid-1950s, when he died in 1953, between 19 to 30 million were killed and died and perished by the actions of own Soviet socialistic government, purported by Stalin and his supporters.
Were there certain religious organizations that were sought out, or there were certain races or ethnicities that were separated? How did the communist regime act towards a blending and a melting pot of different nationalities?
I don't think it was based necessarily by nationality. It was, if you spoke against the regime, that's when a black van would come up to your house in the middle of the night. And first they would take the husband or whoever, it was the spouse speaking against. And if the surviving spouse continued speaking against, then that spouse would be next. And then the children would just disappear. The neighbors were never allowed to ask. The family would never find out what happened to them. Most likely they went to Gulag and died there. And I wanted to say that there are a lot of Russian Jews, the Soviet Jews, that died in World War II and as part of repressions. So it's really hard. It's just the thing is, we never, I guess, discriminate or distinguish between if you're a Jew or other nationality. They were just all Soviet. Yeah, they were all.
But what if they
Soviet
practiced their
Russians.
religion? What if they insisted on practicing their religion and attending synagogue or attending church and preaching to the masses? Was that was there a hard crackdown on those people that insisted on practicing religion?
Yes, those were considered dissidents as well. But most of the religion was eradicated after the Great October Revolution, 1917, 1918. And I think the epitome of that, or the last stroke in the masterpiece, was when they blew up the Temple of Jesus, the Savior, in Moscow. It was this big gilded temple, beautiful, huge, gigantic temple, and they blew it up. I don't remember the year, but early on in the 1920s, maybe.
And what was the reasoning for that? Why is it necessary to blow up a temple and to get rid of religion? If this system of government is so moral, why do we need to blow up people's religious sanctuaries?
Well, there was no religion in the Soviet Union. There was no religion allowed. I wonder. Well, I guess that took away people's attention from the only God in their life, which is the Soviet Socialist Party. You could not have two allegiances. Your allegiance had to be to Stalin, Brezhnev, whoever the general secretary was at the point. Yeah, because religion teaches kindness. Soviet Union, the socialism doesn't necessarily equate to kindness.
That's all the time that we have for this show. This is Life, Death, and the Law. We'll talk to you next week.
If you have questions or want to know more about something that was discussed today, please call the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen at 928-783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.
Hey, Yuma, Dave Ramsey here. If you listen to our show or know anything about us, then you know I only recommend products and services I trust and I believe in. That's why when it comes to protecting your assets and planning for your loved one's future, you've got to call my friends Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen at the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen. I encourage you to take the first step and attend a free, no-pressure seminar and learn all of your options. The firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen has been educating the Yuma community for over 40 years, and this is the only area of law that they practice. Shawn and Adam believe in giving free education to help people make smart decisions about their assets and help them leave a legacy for their family that they can be proud of. Schedule a free personal consultation today. Call 783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.